Where are Elmer, Herman, Bert, Tom, and Charlie? The weak of will, the strong of arm, the clown, the boozer, the fighter? All are sleeping on the hill. One passed in a fever, one was burned in a mine, one was killed in a brawl, one died in jail, one fell from a bridge, toiling for children and wife. All are sleeping on the hill. Where are Ella, Kate, Mag, Lizzie, and Edith? The tender heart, the simple soul, the loud, the proud, the happy one. All are sleeping on the hill. One died in shameful childbirth, one of a thwarted love, one at the hands of a brute in a brothel, one of a broken pride in the search for heart's desire, one after life in far-away London and Paris, was brought to her little space by Ella and Kate and Mag. All are sleeping on the hill. Where are Uncle Isaac and Aunt Emily, and old Townie Kincaid and Savine Houghton, and Major Walker, who had talked with venerable men of the Revolution? All are sleeping on the hill. They brought them dead sons from the war, and daughters whom life had crushed, and their children fatherless, crying. All are sleeping on the hill. Where is old Fiddler Jones, who played with life all his 90 years, braving the sleet with bared breast, drinking, rioting, thinking neither of wife, nor kin, nor gold, nor love, nor heaven?
I lie close to the grave of old Bill Pearsall, who grew rich trading with the Indians, and who afterwards took the bankrupt law and emerged from it richer than ever. Myself, grown tired of toil and poverty, and beholding how old Bill and other grew in wealth, robbed a traveler one night near Proctor's Grove, killing him unwittingly while doing so, for which I was tried and hanged. That was my way of going into bankruptcy. Now who took the bankrupt law in our respective ways, sleep peacefully, side by side.
When Reuben Pantier ran away and threw me, I went to Springfield. There met a lush, whose father just deceased left him a fortune. He married me when drunk. My life was wretched. A year passed, and one day they found him dead. That made me rich. So I moved on to Chicago. After a time, I met Tyler Rountree, villain. I moved on to New York. A gray-haired magnate went mad about me. So another fortune. He died one night. Right there in my arms, you know. I saw his purple face for years thereafter. There was almost a scandal. I moved on, this time to Paris. I was now a woman, insidious, subtle, versed in the world, and rich. My sweet apartment near the Champs-Élysées became a center for all sorts of people. Musicians, poets, dandies, artists, nobles, where we spoke French and German, Italian, English. I wed Count Navigato, native of Genoa. We went to Rome. He poisoned me, I think. Now in the Campo Santo, overlooking the sea where young Columbus dreamed of new worlds. See what they chiseled. Contesta navigato, implora and placite.
I loathed you, Spoon River. I tried to rise above you. I was ashamed of you. I despised you as the place of my nativity. And there in Rome, among the artists, speaking Italian, speaking French, I seemed to myself at times to be free of every trace of my origin. I seemed to be reaching the heights of art, and to breathe the air that the masters breathed, and to see the world with their eyes. But still they'd pass my work and say, "What are you driving at, my friend?" Sometimes the face looks like Apollo's. At others it has a trace of Lincoln's. There was no culture, in Spoon River, and I burned with shame and held my peace. And what could I do, all covered over and weighted down with Western soil, except aspire and pray for another birth in the world, with all Spoon River rooted out of my soul?
My parents thought I would be as great as Edison, or greater. For as a boy, I made balloons and wondrous kites and toys with clocks and little engines and with tracks to run on, and telephones of can and thread. I played the cornet and painted pictures, modeled in clay, and took part of the villain in the Octuron. But then at 21 I married and had to live, and so, to live, I learned the trade of making watches and kept the jewelry store on the square. Thinking and thinking. Not of business, but of the engine and the calculus I studied to build. And all of Spoon River watched and waited to see it worked, but it never worked. And a few kind souls believed my genius was somehow hampered by the store. But it wasn't true. The truth was this: I just did not have the brains.
Only the chemist can tell, not always the chemist, what will result from compounding fluids and solids. And who can tell how men and women will interact on each other and what children will result? There were Benjamin Pantier and his wife, good in themselves, but evil toward each other. He oxygen, she hydrogen, their son a devastating fire. I, trainer, a miser of chemicals, killed while making an experiment, lived unwedded.
Together in this grave lie Benjamin Pantier, attorney at law, and Tim, his dog, constant companion, solace, and friend. Down the gray road, friends, children, men, women, passing one by one out of life, left me till I was alone with Tim for a partner, bedfellow, comrade, and drink. In the morning of life I knew aspiration and saw glory. The she who survives me snared my soul with a snare which bled me to death, till I, once strong of will, lay broken and indifferent, living with Tim in a room back of a dingy office. Under my jawbone is snuggled the bony nose of Tim. Our story is lost in silence. Go by, mad world.
I know that he told that I snared his soul with the snare which bled him to death, and all the men loved him, and most of the women pitied him. But suppose you are really a lady, and have delicate taste, and loathe the smell of whiskey and onions, and the rhythm of Wordsworth's ode runs in your ears, while he goes about from morning till night, repeating bits of that common thing. Oh, why should the spirit of mortal be proud? And then suppose you are a woman well endowed, and the only man with whom the law and morality permit you to have the marital relation is the very man which fills you with disgust every time you think of it, while you think of it every time you see him. That's why I drove him away from home, to live with his dog in a dingy room back of his office.
Well, Emily Sparks, your prayers were not wasted. Your love was not all in vain. I owe whatever I was in life to your hope that would not give me up, to your love that saw me still as good. Dear Emily Sparks, let me tell you the story. I passed the effect of my father and mother. The milliner's daughter made me trouble, and out I went into the world, where I passed through every peril known of wine and women and joy and life. One night in a room in the Rue de Rivoli, I was drinking wine with a black-eyed coquette, and the tears swam into my eyes. She thought they were amorous tears, and smiled for thought of her conquest over me. But my soul was 3,000 miles away, in the days when you taught me in Spoon River. And just because you could no more love me, nor pray for me, nor write me letters, the eternal silence of you spoke instead. And the black-eyed coquette took the tears for hers, as well as the deceiving kisses I gave her. But somehow, from that hour, I had a new vision. Dear Emily Sparks.
Where's my boy? My boy, in what far part of the world, the boy I loved best in all the school? I, the teacher, the old maid, the virgin heart, who made them all my children. Did I know my boy all right? Thinking of him as a spirit aflame, active, ever aspiring. Oh boy, boy for whom I prayed and prayed in many watchful hour and night. Do you remember the letter I wrote to you? Of the beautiful love of Christ? Whether you ever took it or not, my boy, wherever you are, for your soul's sake, and for the clay of you, all the dross of you, may feel to the fire of you, till the fire is nothing but light. Nothing but light.
The earth keeps some vibration going, there in your heart, and that is you. And if the people find you can fiddle, why, fiddle you must, for all your life. What do you see? A harvest of clover, or a meadow to walk through to the river? The winds in the corn, you rub your hands, for beeves hereafter, ready for market? Or else you hear the rustle of skirts, like the girls when dancing a little groove, to Cooney Potter a pillar of dust, or whirling leaves meant ruinous drought. They looked to me like red-headed Sammy, stepping it off to Tourlour. How could I till my 40 acres, not to speak of getting more? With a medley of horns, bassoons, and piccolos stirred in my brain by crows and robins, and the creak of a windmill, only these. And I never started to plow in my life, that someone did not stop on the road and to take me away to dance or picnic. I ended up with 40 acres. I ended up with a broken fiddle and a broken laugh and thousands of memories and not a single regret.
Have you seen, walking through the village, a man with downcast eyes and a haggard face? That is my husband, who by secret cruelty never to be told robbed me, my youth and my beauty, till at last, wrinkled and with yellow teeth, and with a broken pride and shameful humility, I sank into the grave. What do you think gnaws at my husband's heart? The face of what I was, the face of what he made me? These are driving him to the place where I lie. In death, therefore, I am avenged.
They have chiseled on my stone the words. His life was gentle, and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, this was a man. Those who knew me smile as they read this empty rhetoric. My epitaph should have been, life was not gentle to him, and the elements so mixed in him that he made warfare on life, in the which he was slain. While I lived, I could not cope with slanderous tongues, and now that I am dead, I must submit to an epitaph graven by a fool.
Henry got me with child, knowing I could not bring forth life without losing my own. In my youth, therefore, I entered the portals of dust. Traveler, it is believed in the village where I lived that Henry took me with my husband's love, but I proclaim from the dust that he only slew me to gratify his hatred.
How does it happen, tell me, that I, who was most erudite of lawyers, who knew Blackstone and Coke almost by heart, who made the greatest speech the courthouse ever heard, and wrote a brief that won the praise of Justice Breeze, how does it happen, tell me, that I lie here unmarked, forgotten, while Chase Henry, the town drunkard, has a marble block topped by an urn wherein nature, in a mood ironical, has sown a flowering weed?
The spoon he had. But as the war waged bitterly for votes, and rumors flew about the bank, and of the heavy loans which Rhodes' son had made to prop his loss in wheat, and many drew their coin and left the bank of Rhodes more hollow, Harmon Whitney sat, and to the assembled rebels thus he spake: whether to lie supine and let a clique of cold-blooded, scheming, hungry, singing psalms devour our substance, or shall young romance roam these hills about the river, flowering now to April's tears, or shall they sit at home or play croquet where Thomas Rhodes may see? I ask you, if the blood of youth runs o'er and riots against this regimen of gloom, shall we submit to have these youths and maids branded as libertines and wantons? Ere no sooner his words were done than a woman's voice called, "No!" Then rose a sound of moving chairs, as when the numerous swine o'errun the replenished troughs, and every head was turned, as when a flock of geese, back turning to the hunter's tread, rise up with flapping wings, then rang the bell with riotous laughter. For with battered hat tilted upon her saucy head, and fist raised in defiance, Daisy Fraser stood. Headlong she had been hurled out from the hall, save Wendell Boyd, who spoke for women's rights, prevented, in the bellowing voice of Bertrand. Then, mid applause, she hastened toward the stage and flung both gold and silver to the cause, and swiftly left the hall.
Did you ever hear of Editor Whedon giving to the public treasury any of the money he received for supporting candidates for office? Or for writing up the canning factory to get people to invest? Or for suppressing the facts about the banks when it was rotten and ready to break? Did you ever hear of the circuit judge helping anyone except the Q Railroad or the bankers? Or did Reverend Pete or Reverend Sibley give any part of their salary earned by keeping still or speaking out as the leaders wished them to do to the building of the waterworks? But I, Daisy Fraser, who always passed along the street through rows of nods and smiles and coughs and words such as, "There she goes," never was taken before Justice Etternet, without contributing $10 in costs to the school fund for Spoon River.
You would not believe, would you, that I came from good Welsh stock, that I was purer-blooded than the white trash here, and of more direct lineage than the New Englanders and Virginians in Spoon River. You would not believe that I had been to school and read some books. You saw me only as a run-down man with matted hair and beard and ragged clothes. Sometimes a man's life turns into a cancer, from being bruised and continually bruised and swells into a purplish mass like growths on stalks of corn. I was a carpenter, mired in a bog of life, into which I walked thinking it was a meadow, with a slattern for a wife, and poor Minerva for my daughter, whom you tormented and drove to death. So I crept like a snail through the days of my life. No more you'll hear my footsteps in the morning resounding on the hollow sidewalk, going to the corner store for a little cornmeal and a nickel's worth of bacon.
After I got religion and settled down, they gave me a job in the canning works. And every morning I had to fill the tank in the yard with gasoline that fed the blow fires in the shed to heat the soldering irons. And I mounted this rickety ladder to do it, carrying buckets full of stuff. And one morning, as I stood there pouring, the air grew still and seemed to heave. And I shot up as the tank exploded and came down with both legs broken and my eyes burned crisp as a couple of eggs. For someone had left the blow fire going and something sucked the flame into the tank. And the circuit judge said that since it was one of my fellow servants who'd done it, that old Rhodes's son didn't have to pay me. And I sat there on the witness stand saying over and over again, I didn't know him at all.
No other man, unless it was Doc Hill, did more for the people in this town than I. And all the weak, that the halt, the improvident, and those who could not pay flocked to me. I was good-hearted, easy Dr. Myers. I was healthy, happy, in comfortable fortune, blessed with congenial mate, and my children raised and all wedded, doing well in the world. And then, one night, Minerva, the poetess, came to me in her trouble, crying. I tried to help her out. She died. They indicted me. The newspaper disgraced me. My wife perished of a broken heart, and pneumonia finished me.
He protested. All his life long, and the newspapers lied about him villainously. That he was not at fault for Minerva's fall, but only tried to help her. Poor soul, so sunk in sin, he could not see that even in trying to help her, as he called it, he had broken the law, human and divine. Passers-by, an ancient admonition to you. If your ways would be the ways of pleasantness, and all your pathways peace, love God and keep his commandments.
I was the first fruits of the Battle of Missionary Ridge. When I felt the bullet enter my heart, I wished I had stayed home and gone to jail for stealing the hogs of Krill Trannery, instead of running away and joining the army. Rather 1,000 times in the county jail than to lie under this marble figure with wings, and this granite pedestal bearing the words Pro Patria. What do they mean, anyway?
They would have lynched me had I not been secretly hurried away to the jail at Peoria. And yet, I was going peacefully home, carrying my jug, a little drunk, when Logan, the marshal, halted me, called me a drunken hound, and shook me. And, when I cursed him for it, struck me with that prohibition-loaded cane. All this before I shot him. They would have hanged me, except for this. My lawyer, Kinsey Keene, was helping to land old Thomas Rhodes for wrecking the bank, and the judge was a friend of Rhodes and wanted him to escape. And Kinsey offered to quit on Rhodes for 14 years for me. And a deal was made. I served my time and learned to read and write. I never saw any difference between playing cards for money and selling real estate, practicing law, banking, or anything else. For everything is chance.
Over and over they used to ask me, while I was buying the wine or the beer, in Peoria first, then in Chicago, then Denver, Frisco, and New York, wherever I lived, how I led the life, and what was the start of it. A silk dress, I told them, and a promise of marriage from a wealthy man. It was Lucius Atherton. But that was not really it at all. Suppose a boy steals an apple from a tray at a market, and everyone starts calling him a thief. The priest, the minister, the judge, a thief, a thief, a thief. Wherever he goes, he can't get work and he can't get bread without stealing it. Why? The boy will steal. But it is what they have called, what the people have called him, that makes him what he is.
When my mustache curled and my hair was black, and I wore tight trousers and a diamond stud, I was an excellent knave of hearts and took many a trick. But when the gray hairs started to appear, lo, a new generation of girls laughed at me, not fearing me, and there were no more exciting adventures wherein I was shot for the heartless devil, but only drabby affairs, warmed-over affairs of other days and other men. But as time went on, I lived in Meyer's restaurant, partaking in short orders, a gray, untidy, toothless, rural Don Juan. There was a mighty shade who sings of one named Beatrice, and the very things that made him great drove me to the dregs of life.
Often Aner Clute at the gate refused me the parting kiss, saying we should be engaged before that. And so, with a distant clasp of hand, she bade me good night as I brought her home from the skating rink or the revival. No sooner had my departing footsteps died away than Lucius Atherton, so I learned when Aner went to Peoria, stole in at her window and took her riding behind his spanking team of bays into the country. Shock of it all made me want to settle down, and I took the money I earned from my father's estate and put it into the canning factory to get the job of head accountant. And I lost it all. And then I knew I was one of life's fools, whom only death would treat as an equal, making me feel like a man.
I inherited 40 acres from my father, and by working my wife, 2 sons, and a daughter from dawn to dusk, I acquired 1,000 acres. But not content, wishing to own 2,000 acres, I bustled through the year with axe and plow, denying my wife, my sons, my daughter. Squire Higby wrongs me to say that I died from smoking red eagle cigars. In truth, gulping hot pie and coffee in the scorching hours of harvest time brought me here ere I had reached my 60th year.
Often I have studied the marble which was chiseled for me. A boat with furled sail at rest in a harbor. In truth, it pictures not my destination, but my life. For love was offered me, but I shrank from its disillusionment. Sorrow knocked, but I was afraid. Ambition called to me, but I dreaded the chances. All the while, I hungered for meaning in my life. And now I know that we must lift the sail and catch the winds of destiny wherever they carry the boat. For to put meaning in one's life may end in madness. A life without meaning is the torture of restlessness and vague desire. It is a boat longing for the sea, and yet afraid.
If you in the village think that my work was a good one, who closed the saloons and stopped all playing at cards, who hailed old Daisy Fraser before Justice Arnett on many a crusade to purge the people of sin, then why do you let the milliner's daughter Dora and the worthless son of Benjamin Pantier nightly make my grave their unholy pillow?
The very fall that my sister Nancy Knapp set fire to the house, they were trying Dr. Duval for the murder of Zora Clemens. I had sat in court 2 weeks, listening to every witness. It was clear that he had a family, and to let the child be born would not do. Well, how about me, with 8 children and 1 coming, and a farm mortgaged to Thomas Rhodes? On my way home, after listening to the buggy ride and Zora being found in a ditch, right by the steps where the boys had hacked for angleworms was the hatchet. And when I opened the door, there was my wife, big with child. And she began to talk about the farm, mortgaged, and I killed her.
Is it true, fellow citizens, that my old docket, lying there for years on a shelf above my head and over the seat of justice, I say it is true, that docket had an iron rim which gashed my baldness when it fell. I feel it was somehow shaken loose from the heave of air all over town when the gasoline tank at the canning factory blew up and burned Butch Weldy. But let us reason points in order and argue them as such. First, I concede this, my head was cut. But second, the frightful thing was this. The leaves of the docket shot out and showered around me like cards from the hands of a sleight of hand performer. And up until the end, I saw those leaves. And then I realized why they are not leaves. Why can't you see? They are days and days and the days and days of 70 years. And why do you torture me with leaves and little entries on them?
If the excursion train to Peoria had just been wrecked, I might have escaped with my life. Certainly I would have escaped this place. But as it was burned as well, they mistook me for John Allen, who was sent to the Hebrew cemetery in Chicago. And John for me, so I lie here. It was bad enough to run a clothing store in this town, but to be buried here?
Reverend Wiley advised me not to divorce him for the sake of the children, and Judge Somers advised the same. But 2 of the children sided with him, and 2 sided with me, and the ones who sided with him blamed me, and the ones who sided with me blamed him, and they grieved for the one who they sided with. They were torn with the guilt of judging, and troubled in soul for not being able to admire him equally and me. Any gardener knows that growing plants in cellars or under rocks are yellow and twisted and weak. Yet preachers and judges advise the raising of souls where there is no sunlight, only darkness, and no warmth but only cold and dampness. Preachers and judges.
I preached 4,000 sermons, conducted 40 revivals, and baptized many converts. But no deed of mine shines brighter in the memory of the world. None is more treasured by me. Look how I saved the Blisses from divorce and kept the children free from that disgrace to grow up to be moral men and women, happy in themselves and a credit to the village.
I had no objection at all to selling my household effects at auction in the village square. It gave my beloved flock the chance to have something of mine for a memorial. But that trunk, which was struck off to Butchard the grog keeper, did you know it contained the manuscripts of a lifetime of sermons, and he burned them as waste paper.
The secret of the stars, gravitation. And the secret of the earth, layers of rock. The secret of the soil is to receive the seed, and the secret of the seed, the germ. But my secret is under a mound you shall never find.
As to democracy, fellow citizens, are you not prepared to admit that I, who inherited riches and was to the manor born, was second to none in Spoon River in my devotion to the cause of liberty? As to my contemporary, Anthony Findlay, who was born in a shanty and beginning life as a water carrier for the section hands, becoming a section hand himself when he was grown, and later foreman of the gang, and rising to superintendency of the railroad. Living in Chicago was a veritable slave driver, grinding the faces of labor and a bitter enemy of democracy. So I say to you, Spoon River, and to you, O Republic, beware the man who rises to power from one suspender.
The press of the Spoon River Clarion was wrecked, and I was tarred and feathered for publishing this on the day the anarchists were hanged in Chicago. I saw a beautiful woman with bandaged eyes standing on the steps of a marble temple. Great multitudes passed in front of her, lifting their faces to her imploringly. In her left hand she held a sword. She was brandishing the sword, sometimes striking a child, again a laborer, again a slinking woman, again a lunatic. In her right hand she held a scale, and into the scale pieces of gold were tossed by those who dodged the strokes of the sword. A man in a black gown read from a manuscript. She is no respecter of persons. Then a youth wearing a red cap leaped to her side and snatched away the bandage. And lo, the lashes had been eaten away from the oozy eyelids, the eyeballs were seared with a milky mucus, the madness of a dying soul was written on her face. But the multitude saw why she wore the bandage.
Road slave! Selling shoes and gingham and flour and bacon and overalls and clothing all day long, 14 hours a day, 313 days, for over 20 years, saying yes ma'am and yes sir and thank you 1,000 times a day, all for $50 a month. And living in this rattletrap room in the commercial, compelled to go to Sunday school and listen to the Reverend Abner Pete 104 times a year for more than an hour at a time, because Thomas Rhodes owned the church as well as the bank and the store. Then, one day, while tying my necktie and looking at myself in the looking glass, I saw that my hair was gray and my face like a sodden pie. And I cursed and cursed, you damned old thing, you cowardly dog, you rotten pauper, you road slave! Until Roger Bowham thought I was having a fight with someone and looked through the transom just in time to see me collapse in a heap on the floor from a broken vein in my head.
The sudden death of Eugene Carmen put me in line to be promoted $50 a month, and I told my wife and children that night, but it did not come. And so I thought Old Rhodes suspected me of stealing the blankets I took and sold on the side for money to pay my doctor's bill for my little girl. Then, like a bolt, Old Rhodes accused me and promised me pity for my family's sake if I confessed, and so I confessed, and begged him to keep it out of the papers. And I asked the editors too. Then the constable took me, and every paper, except for the Clarion, wrote me up as a thief, because Old Rhodes was an advertiser, and he wanted to make an example of me. Oh, well, you know how my children cried, and my wife pitied and hated me, and how I came to lie here.
To be able to see every side of every question, to be on every side, to be everything, to be nothing long, to pervert truth, to write it for a purpose, to use the great feelings and passions of the human family for base designs, for cunning's end, to wear a mask like the great Greek actors, your 8-page paper behind which you huddle, bawling through the megaphone of big type, "This is I, the giant," thereby also living as a sneak thief, poisoned by the anonymous words of your clandestine soul, to scratch dirt over scandal for money, to exhume it to the winds for revenge, or to sell papers, crushing reputations, or bodies if need be, to wood at any cost, to save your own life, to glory in demonic power, ditching civilization, as a paranoid boy puts a log on a train track and derails the express train. To be an editor, as I was, and then to lie here, where the sewage runs off from the village, and the empty cans and garbage are dumped.
All they said was true. I wrecked my father's bank with my loans to dabble in wheat. But this was true, too. I was buying wheat for him, who couldn't margin the deal in his own name because of his church relationship. And while George Reese was serving his sentence, I chased the will-o-wisp of women and the mockery of wine in New York. It's deathly to sicken of wine and women when little else is left in life. But suppose your head is bowed and gray over a table with the acrid stubs of cigarettes and empty glasses, and then one night you hear a knock. And you know it's the knock so long drowned out by the sound of popping corks and the peacock screams of demi-reps. And you look, and there's your theft. And your heart skips beats to say to you, the game is over. I've called for you. Go out on Broadway and be run over, and they'll ship you back to Spoon River.
I staggered on through darkness. It was a hazy sky, with a few stars. I followed as best I could. It was 9 o'clock. I was lost. I was trying to get home. Oh, and I was lost, though really keeping the road. I staggered through a gate and into a yard and called out at the top of my lungs, "Oh, fiddler! Oh, Mr. Jones!" Thought it was his house, and he would show me the way home. But who should step out but 80 Blood, wearing his nightshirt and waving a stick of wood, and roaring about the saloons and the criminals they made. "You drunken Oscar Hummel!" he shouted, as I stood there, waving to and fro, taking the blows from his stick of wood, till I dropped down, dead, at his feet.
She loved me. Oh, how she loved me. Since the first day that she saw me, I knew I could never escape. But once we married, I thought she might prove her mortality and let me out, or she might divorce me. But few die, none resign. So I ran away and I was gone a year on a lark. She said everything would be fine when I returned. And I did return, and I told her that while taking a row in a boat, I was captured near Von Buren Street by pirates on Lake Michigan. And they kept me in chains so I couldn't write her. She cried and said it was outrageous, inhumane, and so I concluded our marriage with divine dispensation. It couldn't be dissolved, except by death. I was right. He ran away for a year, and when he returned, he told me this silly story about how he was captured by pirates on Lake Michigan and held in chains so he couldn't write me. But I knew very well what he was doing. I knew that he met up with the milliner, Mrs. Williams, when she went to the city to buy goods, as she said. But a promise is a promise, and marriage is marriage, and out of respect for my own character, I refuse to let myself be drawn into a divorce by a man who has simply forgotten about his marital duty and vow.
I have 2 monuments besides this granite obelisk here. One was the house I built on the hill, with its spires, bay windows, and roof of slate. The other, the lakefront in Chicago, where the railway keeps a switching yard, with the whistling engines and the crunch of wheels and the smoke and the soot thrown all over the city, and the crash of the cars on the boulevard, like a hog pen on the harbor, with this great metropolis, foul as a sty. And I helped to give this heritage to generations yet unborn with my vote in the House of Representatives. And the lure of the whole thing was to be free from the never-ending fright of need and to give my daughters gentle breeding and a sense of security in life. But alas, although I had my mansion and my travel passes and my local distinctions, I could hear the whispers wherever I went. And my daughters grew up with a look as if someone were about to strike them. They married madly, helter-skelter, just to get out and have a change. And what was the whole of the business worth? Why, it wasn't worth a damn!
I was the daughter of Lambert Hutchins, born in the cottage near the grist mill, reared the mansion with its spires, bay windows, and roof of slate. How proud my mother was of that mansion, how proud of my father's rise in the world, and how my father loved and watched us, and guarded our happiness. But I believed the house was a curse, for father's fortune was little beside it, and when my husband found he had married a girl who was really poor, he taunted me with spires and called the house a fraud on the world, a treacherous lure to young men rising hopes of dowry not to be had. And a man, while selling his vote, should get enough from the people's betrayal to wall the whole of his family in. He vexed my life until I moved back home and lived like an old maid till I died, keeping house for my father.
How did you feel? You libertarians who spent your talents rallying reasons around the saloon as though liberty was not to be found anywhere except at a bar or at a table, guzzling. How did you feel, Ben Pantier and the rest of you, who almost stoned me for a tyrant garbed as a moralist, for frowning on Yorkshire pudding and ale and goodwill and rosy cheer? You who never saw that in a grog shop in your life. How did you feel when I was dead and gone? And your goddess, Liberty, unmasked as a strumpet, who sold out the streets of Spoon River to insolent giants who ran the saloons from afar. Did it never occur to you that real liberty is liberty of the mind and not of the belly?
I wanted to go away to college, but rich Aunt Persis wouldn't let me. So I made gardens and raked lawns and bought John Alden's books with my earnings. I wanted to marry Delia Prickett, but how could I do so with what I earned? And there was Aunt Persis, more than 70, who sat half alive in her wheelchair, with her throat so paralyzed that when she swallowed, the soup ran out of her mouth like a duck, a gourmand yet, investing all her income in mortgages and fretting about her rents and notes and papers. That day I was sawing wood for her and reading Proughton in between. I went back inside for a drink of water, and there she sat, asleep in her chair, with Proughton lying on the table, and the bottle of chloroform she used for an aching tooth. I poured the chloroform on a handkerchief and held it to her nose until she died. Oh, Delia, you and Proughton steadied my hand, and the coroner said she died of heart failure. I married Delia and got the money. A joke on you, Spoon River.
Horses and men are just alike. There was my stallion, Billy Lee, black as a cat and trim as a deer, with an eye of fire and keen to start. He could hit the fastest speeds of any racer around Spoon River. But just as you'd think he couldn't lose with his lead of 50 yards or more, he'd rear up and throw his rider, fall over backwards, completely gone to pieces. He was the perfect fraud, you see. He couldn't win, he couldn't work, he was too light to haul or plow with, and nobody wanted colts from him. And when I tried to drive him, well, he ran away and killed me.
When I died, the circulating library, which I built up for Spoon River and maintained for the good of inquiring minds, was sold at auction on the public square, as if to destroy the last vestige of my memory and influence. For those of you who cannot see the virtue in knowing Vonley's Ruins and Butler's Analogy, and Faust as well as Evangeline, were the true power in the village. And often you asked me, what is the use of knowing the evil in the world? I am out of your way now, Spoon River. Choose your own good and call it good. For I could never make you see. But no one knows what is good who knows not what is evil. And no one knows what is true who knows not what is false.
When I first came to Spoon River, I did not know whether what they told me was true or false. They would bring me the epitaph and stand around the shop while I worked and say, "He was so kind. He was so wonderful. She was the sweetest woman. He was a consistent Christian." And I chiseled for them whatever they wished, in all ignorance of the truth. But later, as I lived among the people here, I knew how near to life were the epitaphs, and that they were ordered for them as they died. But still I chiseled whatever they paid me to chisel, and made myself party to the false chronicles of the stone, even as the historian does, who writes without knowing the truth, or because he is influenced to hide it.
It was moonlight, and the earth sparkled with new fallen frost. Midnight, and not a soul abroad. Out of the chimney of the courthouse a greyhound of smoke leapt and chased the northwest wind. I carried a ladder to the landing of the stairs, and leaned it against the frame of the trapdoor in the ceiling of the portico. I crawled under the roof and amid the rafters, and flung among the seasoned timbers a lighted handful of oil-soaked waste. Then I came down and slunk away. In a little while, the fire bell rang. Clang, 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 and the Spoon River Ladder Company came with a dozen buckets and began to pour water on the glorious bonfire, growing hotter and higher and brighter, till the walls fell in and the limestone columns where Lincoln stood crashed like trees when the woodman fells them. When I came back from Joliet, there was a new courthouse with a dome, for I was punished like all who destroy the past for the sake of the future.
The white men played all sorts of jokes on me. They took big fish off my hook and put little ones on, while I was away getting stringier, and made me believe I hadn't seen all right the fish I had caught. When Burr Robbins came to town, they got the ringmaster to tame a leopard into the ring, and made me believe I was whipping a wild beast like Samson, when I, for an offer of $50, dragged him out of his cage. One time I entered my blacksmith shop, and shook as I saw some horseshoes crawling across the floor as if alive. Walter Simmons had put a magnet under the barrel of water. Yet every one of you, you white men, was fooled about fish and about the leopards too, and you didn't know any more of the horseshoes, what moved you about Spoon River.
The bank broke, and I lost my savings. I made up my mind to run away from Spoon River, leave my place in life and my family. But no sooner had the midnight train pulled in than off the steps jumped Cully Green and Martin Weiss, who began to fight to settle their ancient rivalry. And it seemed to me that Cully was winning, when his bloody face broke into a grin of sickly cowardice and leaned on Martin, saying, "We're friends, Martin. You know that I'm your friend." But a terrible punch from Martin knocked him around and around and into a heap. And they arrested me as a witness. I lost my train and stayed in Spoon River to wage my battle of life to the end. Oh, Cully Green, you were my savior. You who loitered listless around the streets for years, tying rags around your festering soul, who failed to fight it out.
You are over there, Father Malloy, where the holy ground is, and the cross marks every grave. Not here with us on the hill, us of wavering faith and clouded vision, drifting hope and unforgiven sins. You were so human, Father Malloy, talking of friendly glass with us, siding with us who would rescue Spoon River from the coldness and dreariness of village morality. You are like a traveler who brings a little box of sand for the wastes about the pyramid and makes them real and Egypt real. You were part of and related to a great past, and yet you were so close to so many of us. You believed in the joy of life. You did not seem to be ashamed of the flesh. You faced life as it is and as it changes. Some of us almost came to you, Father Malloy, seeing how your church had divined the heart and provided for it through Peter the Flame, Peter the Rock.
At first, I suspected something. She acted so calm and absent-minded. And one day, I heard the back door shut as I entered the front, and I saw him slink back of the smokehouse into the lot and across the field. And I meant to kill him on sight. But that day, as I was walking near Fourth Bridge without a stick or a stone in hand, so I'm standing there, scared to death, holding his rabbits. And all I could say was, don't, as he aimed and fired at my heart.
I was just turned 21, and Henry Phipps, the Sunday school superintendent, made a speech in Bindle's Opera House. The honor of the flag must be upheld, he said, whether it be assailed by the barbacious tribe of Telagos or the greatest power in Europe. And we cheered and cheered the speech and the flag he waved as he spoke. And I went to war in spite of my father. Followed the flag till I saw it raised by our camp in the rice field near Manila. And all of us cheered and cheered. But there were flies and poisonous things, and there was deadly water and cruel heat, and the sickening, putrid food, and the beastly acts between ourselves or alone, with bullying, hatred, degradation among us, and the days of loathing and nights of fear to the hour of the charge through the steaming swamp, following the flag, till I fell with a scream, shot through the guts. Now there's a flag over me in Spoon River. A flag. A flag.
Oh, the dew-wet grass of the meadow of North Carolina, through which Rebecca followed me, wailing, wailing, one child in her arms and three that ran along, wailing, lengthening out the farewell to me, off to war with the British. And then the long, hard years down to the day of Yorktown, and then my search for Rebecca, finding her at last in Virginia. 2 children dead in the meanwhile. We went by oxen to Tennessee, thence, after years, to Illinois, and last to Spoon River. We cut the buffalo grass and felled the forests. We built the schoolhouses and built the bridges and leveled roads and tilled the fields, alone with poverty, scourges, and death. If Harry Wilmans, who fought the Filipinos, is to have a flag on his grave, take it from mine.
Suppose it is nothing but the hive. There are drones and workers and queens and nothing but storing honey, material things, as well as culture and wisdom, for the next generation, for the generation never living except as it warms in the sunlight of youth, strengthening its wings on what has been gathered and tasting on the way to the hive from the clover field, the delicate spoil. Suppose all this, and suppose the truth, that the nature of man is greater than nature's need for the hive. And you must bear the burden of life, as well as the urge from your spirit's excess. Well, I say to live it out like a god, sure of immortal life, though you are in doubt, is the way to live it. And if that doesn't make God proud of you, then God is nothing but gravitation, or sleep is the golden goal.
This weeping willow. Why do you not plant a few for the millions of children not yet born, as well for us? Are they not non-existent or cells asleep without mind? Did they not come to earth, their birth rupturing the memory of the previous being? Answer. The field of unexplored intuition is yours. But in any case, why not plant a few willows for them, as well as for us? Marie Battinson, you observe the carven hand with the index finger pointing heavenward. That is a direction, no doubt. But shall we one follow it? Is it well to abstain from murder and lust, to forgive, to do others good, worship God without graven images? But these are external means, after all, by which you chiefly do good to yourself. The inner kernel is freedom, it is light, it's purity. and I can no more find the goal, or lose it, according to your vision.
I was the laughingstock of the village, chiefly of people of good sense, as they call themselves, also the learned, like Reverend Pete, who read Greek the same as English, or instead of talking free trade or preaching some form of baptism, instead of believing in the efficacy of walking cracks, picking up pins the right way, seeing the new moon over the right shoulder, or curing rheumatism with blue glass, I asserted the sovereignty of my own soul. Before Mary Baker G. Eddy even got started with what she called science, I had mastered the Bhagavad Gita and cured my soul. For Mary began to cure bodies with souls. Peace to all worlds.
I was the Sunday school superintendent, the dummy president on the wagon works and the canning factory, acting for Thomas Rhodes and the banking clique. My son was the cashier at the bank, wedded to Rhodes' daughter. My weekdays spent in making money, and my Sundays at church and in prayer, in everything a cog in the wheels of things they are, of money, master and man, made white with the paint of the Christian creed. And then the bank collapsed. I stood and hooked at the wretched machine. The wheels with the blowholes stopped, with putty and painted, the rotten bolts, the broken rods, and only the hopper for souls fit to be used again, in a new devourer of life. When newspapers, judges, and money magnicians built over again, I was stripped to the bone, but I lay in the rock of ages, seeing now the game, no longer the dupe, and knowing the upright shall dwell in the land, but the years of the wicked shall not be shortened. Then suddenly, Dr. Myers discovered a cancer in my liver. I was not, after all, the particular care of God. Why, even thus standing at the peak, above the mists through which I had climbed, and ready for the larger life in the world, eternal forces moved me with a push.
Samuel is forever talking of his elm, but I did not need to die to learn about roots. I, who dug all the ditches in Spoon River, look at my elm, sprung from as good a seed as his, sown at the same time. It is dying at the top, not from lack of life or fungus, nor destroying insects, as the sexton thinks. Look, Samuel, where the roots have struck rock and can no farther spread, and all the while the top of the tree is tiring itself out and dying, trying to grow.
The Spoonian. Exultant cries arose. Then, as George Trimble had overcome his fear and facilitation and begun to speak, the door creaked and the idiot Willie Metcalf, breathless and hatless, whiter than a sheet, entered and cried, "The marshal's on his way to arrest you all. And if you only knew who's coming here tomorrow, I was listening beneath the window where the other side are making plans."
I was Willie Metcalf. They used to call me Dr. Myers because they said I looked like him. And he was my father, according to Jack McGuire. I lived in the livery stable, sleeping on the floor, side by side with Roger Bowham's bulldog, or sometimes in a stall. I could crawl between the legs of the wildest horses without getting kicked. We knew each other. On spring days, I tramped through the country to get the feeling, which I sometimes lost, that I was not a separate thing from the earth. I used to lose myself as if in sleep, by lying with eyes half open in the woods. Sometimes I talked with the animals, even the toads and the snakes, anything that had an eye to look into. Once I saw a stone in the sunshine, trying to turn into jelly. In April days, this cemetery, the dead people gathered all around me and grew still, like a congregation in silent prayer. I never knew whether I was part of the earth with flowers growing in me, or whether I walked. Now I know.
They called me the weakling, the simpleton, for my brothers were strong and beautiful, while I, the last child of parents who had aged, inherited only the residue of power. But they, my brothers, were eaten up in the fury of the flesh, which I had not, made pulp in the active of the sense, which I had not, hardened by the growth of lust, which I had not, though making names and riches for themselves. Then I, the weak one, the simpleton, resting in a little corner of life, saw a vision, and through me many saw this vision, not knowing it was through me. Thus a tree sprang, from me a mustard seed.
Ye young debaters over the doctrine of the soul's immortality, I who lie here was the village atheist, talkative, contentious, versed in the arguments of the infidels, but through a long sickness, coughing myself to death, I read the Upanishads and the poetry of Jesus, and they lighted a torch of hope and intuition and desire which the shadow leading me swiftly through the caverns of darkness could not extinguish. Listen to me, you who live in the senses and think through the senses only. Immortality is not a gift. Mortality is an achievement, and only those who strive mightily shall possess it.
They laughed at me as Professor Moon, as a boy in Spoon River born with the thirst of knowing about the stars. They jeered when I spoke of the lunar mountains, of the thrilling heat and cold, of the ebon valleys and silver peaks, and the Spica quadrillions of miles away, and the littleness of man. But now that my grave is honored, friends, let it not be because I taught the lore of the stars in Knox College, but rather for this, that through the stars I preached the greatness of man, who is nonetheless a part of the scheme of things for the distance of Spica or the spiral nubile, nor any less the part of question of what all the drama means.
Meanwhile, within a room back in the basement of the church, with blood counseled the wisest heads, Judge Somers first, deep learned in life, and next to him Garrison Standard, a traitor to the liberals, who with lip upcurled in scorn and bitter sneer, such strife about insult to a woman, a girl of 18, but at 10 o'clock then proved the idiot's tale of yester-eve a word of warning. Suddenly, on the streets walked hog-eyed Allen, terror of the hills, that looked on Bernadette 10 miles removed. No man of this degenerate day could lift the boulders which he threw, and when he spoke the windows rattled. Beneath his brows, thatched like a shed of bristling hair of black, his small eyes glistened like a maddened boar. And when he walked the boards creaked, and when he walked a song of menace rumbled, and thus he came, the champion of A.D. blood, commissioned to terrify the liberals. Many fled, as when a hawk soars o'er the chicken yard. He passed the poles with a playful hand, touched Brown the giant, and he fell against, as though he were a child, the wall. So strong was hog-eyed Allen, but the liberals smiled, for as soon as hog-eyed Allen reached the walk, close on his steps paced Bingle Mike, brought in by Kinsey Keene, the subtle-witted one. To match the hog-eyed Allen, he was scarce 3/4 the other's bulk, but steel his arms, with a tiger's heart. 2 men he killed, and many wounded in the days before, and no one feared.
But when the hog-eyed one saw Bangle Mike, his countenance grew dark. The bristles o'er his red eyes twitched with rage. The song he rumbled lowered. Round and round the courthouse paced he, followed stealthily by Bangle Mike, who jeered him every step. Come, elephant, and fight. Come, O hog-eyed coward. Come face about and fight me. Lumbering sneak. Come, beefy bull, hit me if you can. Take out your gun, you duffer. Give me reason to draw and kill you. Take your billy out, and I'll crack your boar's head with a piece of brick. But never a word the hog-eyed one returned, but trod about the courthouse, followed both by troops of boys and watched by all the men. and all day he walked the square.
But when Apollo stood with reluctant look above the hills, as fain to see the end, and all the votes were cast, and closed the polls, before the door of Trainer's drugstore, Bengal Mike, in tones that echoed through the village, bawled the taunt, "Who was your mother, hog-eyed?" In a trice, as when a wild boar turns upon the hound that through the brakes upon an August day has gashed him with its teeth, the hog one, rushed with his giant arms on Bengal Mike and grabbed him by the throat. Then rose to heaven the frightened cries of boys and yells of men forth rushing to the street. And Bengal Mike moved this way and that, and drew in his head as if his neck to shorten, and bent down to break the death grip of the hog-eyed one. Twixt guttural wrath and the fast expiring strength, striking his fists against the invulnerable chest of hog-eyed Allen. Then, when some came in to part them, others stayed them, and the fight spread among dozens. Many valiant souls went down from clubs and bricks.
But tell me, Muse, what god or goddess rescued Bengal Mike? With one last mighty struggle did he grasp the murderous hands and turning, kick his foe. The strength from hog-eyed Allen at his side sank limp in those giant arms, and over the face dread, pallor, and sweat and anguish spread, and those great knees, invincible but late, shook his weight. And as quickly as the lion leaps on its wounded prey, did Bengal Mike smite with the rock on the temple of his foe, and down sank the darkness over his eyes, passed like a cloud. As when a woodman fells on some giant oak upon a summer day, and the songsters of the forest hill, and one great hawk has his nestling young, and amid the topmost branches croaks, as a crash of the mighty leaf branches through the tangled boughs of other brother oaks, and fell, so the hog-eyed one, amid the lamentations of the friends of A.D. Blood. Just then, 4 lusty men bore down the town marshal, whose iron face and purple pall of death already lay. The Trainer's drugstore, shot by Jack McGuire, and cries went up of "Lynch him!" and the sound of the running feet from every side was heard, bent on the